In the dim glow of a Chicago streetlight, Marcus Tate walked with purpose, his sneakers scuffing against the cracked pavement. It was just after 11 p.m. on a humid July night in 2025, and the South Side was alive with the usual hum of distant sirens and muffled conversations spilling from corner stores. Marcus, a 32-year-old mechanic with a reputation for fixing anything from busted carburetors to broken trust, carried a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, his head slightly bowed, not out of fear but out of habit, a man used to moving through a world that often misread him. To the two officers in the patrol car creeping along 79th Street, he was just another black guy in a hoodie, another silhouette to scrutinize. They didn't know who he was. 9 minutes later, they would be begging him to save their lives. Marcus had grown up in Englewood, where survival meant learning the rhythm of the streets, when to make eye contact, when to look away, when to quicken your pace. He wasn't a saint, but he wasn't a sinner either. He'd spent his life dodging stereotypes and sidestepping trouble, building a quiet reputation as the guy who could talk his way out of anything. Tonight, though, trouble found him. The patrol car's headlights caught him as he crossed the street, and the officers, Officer Daniel Hayes and Officer Michael Ruiz, exchanged a glance. Hayes, a 15-year veteran with a short fuse, muttered something about suspicious behavior. Ruiz, newer to the force and eager to prove himself, nodded. They flipped on the siren, a short blip that cut through the night like a warning shot. Marcus heard it and froze mid-step. His heart kicked up a notch, but he kept his face neutral. He knew the drill, hands visible, voice calm, no sudden moves. The car pulled up beside him, and Hayes leaned out the window, his voice sharp. "Hey you. Where you headed?" Marcus turned slowly, meeting the officer's gaze. "Home," he said, his tone even. "Just got off work." He gestured toward the auto shop's logo on his jacket, but Hayes wasn't looking at details. "ID," Hayes demanded, stepping out of the car. Ruiz followed, his hand resting on his holster, eyes darting between Marcus and the empty street. Marcus reached for his wallet, moving deliberately. He'd been stopped before, too many times to count, and he knew how fast things could escalate. "It's in my back pocket," he said, narrating his movements to avoid any misunderstanding. He handed over his driver's license, and Hayes snatched it, squinting at the name. "Marcus Tate," he read aloud, as if testing the sound of it. "You got anything on you we should know about?" Marcus shook his head. "Just my tools in the bag. I'm a mechanic." Ruiz stepped closer, his flashlight sweeping over Marcus's backpack. "Open it," he ordered. Marcus complied, unzipping the bag and holding it out. Inside were wrenches, a socket set, and a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in foil. Ruiz poked at the contents, his face unreadable. Hayes, meanwhile, ran Marcus's ID through the system, his radio crackling with static. "No warrants," Hayes muttered, sounding almost disappointed. But he wasn't done. "What's a guy like you doing out here this late?" he pressed, stepping closer. Marcus felt the familiar weight of being sized up, of being reduced to a profile. "Like I said, I'm going home," he repeated, his voice steady but firm. Hayes smirked, glancing at Ruiz. "You believe this guy," he said, as if Marcus wasn't standing right there. Ruiz didn't respond, but his posture stiffened. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he held his tongue. He knew better than to argue. Instead, he stood still, his eyes locked on Hayes, who seemed itching for a reason to escalate. "Turn around," Hayes said suddenly. "Hands on the wall." Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he knew compliance was his best chance to walk away. Slowly, he turned and placed his hands on the brick wall of the corner store. Hayes patted him down, his movements rough, while Ruiz kept the flashlight trained on Marcus's face. The beam was blinding, but Marcus didn't flinch. He focused on his breathing, counting silently to keep calm. 1, 2, 3. He thought of his daughter, Aaliyah, waiting at home with her grandmother, probably curled up with her favorite book about space. He thought of the promise he'd made to be there for her bedtime story. He just needed to get through this. But then it happened. A sharp crack echoed down the street, followed by a scream. Hayes froze, his hand still on Marcus's back. Ruiz whipped around, his flashlight beam swinging wildly. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. Another crack, louder this time, and the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Marcus turned his head slightly, catching a glimpse of movement at the end of the block. Figures were running, shadows darting between buildings. A gunshot rang out, and Hayes dropped to a crouch, yanking Marcus down with him. "Stay down!" he barked, but Marcus was already moving, his instincts kicking in. The street erupted into chaos. More gunshots, closer now, and the sound of tires screeching. A black SUV roared around the corner, its windows tinted, its engine growling. Hayes and Ruiz scrambled for cover behind their patrol car, their radios crackling with frantic calls for backup. Marcus crouched low, his heart pounding, but his mind was clear. He recognized the SUV. It belonged to a local crew known for settling scores with bullets. He'd seen them before, cruising the neighborhood, always a step ahead of the law. Hayes fumbled with his radio, shouting coordinates, but his voice was drowned out by another burst of gunfire. Bullets pinged off the patrol car, and Ruiz yelped as a round grazed his shoulder. "We're pinned," he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Marcus glanced at the officers, their faces pale in the flickering streetlight. Hayes, the tough guy, was sweating, his hands shaking as he gripped his service weapon. Ruiz was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. Marcus's eyes darted to the alley across the street. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a car, but it led to a network of backstreets he knew like the back of his hand. He'd grown up running those alleys, dodging trouble and finding shortcuts. "We need to move," he said, his voice low but urgent. Hayes snapped his head around, glaring. "You don't give orders here," he spat. But another volley of bullets cut him off, shattering the patrol car's windshield. Ruiz groaned, his face contorted in pain. "He's right," he gasped. "We're sitting ducks." Marcus didn't wait for permission. He grabbed Ruiz's good arm and pulled him toward the alley, keeping low. Hayes hesitated, then followed, cursing under his breath. The SUV was circling now, its occupants firing indiscriminately. Marcus led the way, his steps sure despite the chaos. He knew the alley's twists and turns, the rusted fire escapes, the boarded-up windows. He'd navigated worse situations as a kid, back when survival meant outsmarting both the streets and the system. They ducked behind a dumpster, the stench of garbage mixing with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Ruiz was breathing hard, his face ashen. "I'm hit bad," he muttered, his hand slick with blood. Marcus ripped off his jacket and pressed it against Ruiz's shoulder, applying pressure. "Keep it together," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "You're not dying here." Hayes was crouched beside them, his gun drawn but useless against the SUV's firepower. "Backup's coming," he said, more to himself than anyone else. But Marcus knew better. Backup was minutes away, and they didn't have minutes. The SUV screeched to a stop at the mouth of the alley, its doors flying open. 3 figures spilled out, their faces obscured by bandanas, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. Marcus's mind raced. He scanned the alley, spotting a loose metal pipe leaning against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was something. He grabbed it, testing its weight. Hayes noticed and hissed, "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus didn't answer. He was already moving, staying low, using the shadows to his advantage. The gunmen advanced, their footsteps heavy on the gravel. Marcus gestured for Hayes to stay with Ruiz. "Keep him alive," he whispered. Hayes looked like he wanted to argue, but another groan from Ruiz silenced him. Marcus crept forward, his grip tight on the pipe. He wasn't a fighter, not in the way these guys were, but he knew how to survive. He'd learned that much growing up in a neighborhood where every day was a test. One of the gunmen rounded the dumpster, his rifle raised. Marcus didn't hesitate. He swung the pipe with all his strength, catching the man in the knee. The gunman howled, collapsing, his weapon clattering to the ground. Marcus dove for it, his hands closing around the rifle just as the second gunman appeared. A shot rang out, grazing Marcus's arm, but he didn't flinch. He rolled behind a stack of crates, firing a warning shot that sent the second gunman scrambling for cover. Hayes watched, wide-eyed, as Marcus moved with a precision that belied his calm demeanor. "Who the hell is this guy?" he muttered. Ruiz, barely conscious, mumbled something incoherent. The third gunman was shouting now, calling for his crew to regroup. Marcus used the moment to drag the first gunman's unconscious body behind the dumpster, stripping him of his ammo. He tossed the extra magazine to Hayes. "You know how to use this?" he asked. Hayes nodded, his bravado gone, replaced by something like respect. The alley was a bottleneck, and Marcus knew it was their only advantage. He directed Hayes to cover the left side while he took the right. "Aim high," he said. "Scare them, don't kill them." Hayes looked confused but complied, firing a burst that sent sparks flying off a metal gate. The gunmen hesitated, their confidence shaken. Marcus used the distraction to slip closer, flanking them. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just wanted to get out alive, to get back to Aaliyah. The second gunman made a mistake, stepping into the open to fire. Marcus tackled him, driving his shoulder into the man's chest. They hit the ground hard, the gunman's rifle skidding away. Marcus pinned him, his knee on the man's chest, and delivered a quick jab to his jaw. The gunman went limp. 2 down, 1 to go. But the third was smarter, staying back, using the SUV for cover. Marcus could hear him shouting into a phone, calling for reinforcements. Time was running out. Marcus crawled back to Hayes and Ruiz. "We need to move now," he said. Ruiz was fading, his breathing shallow. Hayes looked at Marcus, his earlier arrogance replaced by desperation. "You got a plan?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "There's a safe house 2 blocks over. Old church basement. We can hold out there." Hayes didn't question him. He helped lift Ruiz and they moved, staying low, weaving through the alleys. The third gunman pursued, but Marcus's knowledge of the terrain gave them the edge. He led them through a maze of backstreets, doubling back to throw off their pursuer. By the time they reached the church, Ruiz was barely conscious, and Hayes was panting, his uniform soaked with sweat. Marcus kicked open the basement door, revealing a dusty room with a few cots and a first aid kit stashed in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Marcus worked quickly, cleaning Ruiz's wound with supplies from the kit. He'd learned basic first aid from his uncle, a former paramedic, and his hands were steady as he bandaged the officer. Hayes watched, silent, his gun still clutched in his hand. "Where'd you learn all this?" he asked finally. Marcus didn't look up. "You grow up around here, you learn what you need to." Sirens wailed in the distance, closer now. Backup was finally arriving. Marcus stepped back, letting Hayes take over with Ruiz. The officer's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no suspicion, no judgment. "You saved our asses," Hayes said, his voice low. Marcus shrugged. "Didn't have a choice." But Hayes shook his head. "Yeah, you did. And you didn't take it." The basement door burst open, and SWAT officers stormed in, their weapons raised. Hayes waved them off, shouting that they were clear. Marcus stepped back, his hands raised, knowing how this looked. A black man in a hoodie, standing over 2 cops, one bleeding. But Hayes spoke up, his voice firm. "He's with us. He's the reason we're alive." The SWAT team lowered their weapons, and Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He thought of Aaliyah again, of the story he'd promised to read her. He'd make it home tonight, but he knew this wasn't the end. The streets would still be there tomorrow, And so would the assumptions, the profiling, the split-second judgments. But for now he'd done what he always did. He survived. As the paramedics arrived and took over with Ruiz, Hayes approached Marcus, holding out his ID. "You're one hell of a guy, Tate," he said. Marcus took the ID, slipping it back into his wallet. "Just a guy," he said, and walked out into the night, the weight of those 9 minutes settling into his bones.